The first thing Luis Moreno learned on his first night at Barton's Grill was how loud laughter could be when it wasn't meant for you. It came from the front of the restaurant, sharp and careless, cutting through the clatter of plates and the hiss of grease on the grill. Luis stood at the sink in the back, sleeves rolled up, hands already raw from hot water and industrial soap, pretending not to hear it. He had learned that skill early, pretending not to hear, not to see, not to react. He was the dishwasher now. That was the title on paper. That was the limit of expectation. Luis was in his early 30s, Latino, quiet with a lean frame and eyes that rarely stopped observing. His English carried a soft accent, the kind people mistook for lack of intelligence. He wore the standard black kitchen uniform, already damp at the collar, already smelling of bleach and grease. The manager, a white man named Rick, had barely looked up during the interview. Ever worked in a restaurant? Yes. Dish pits in the back, don't slow service. That was it. No questions about where Luis had worked before. No interest in why his resume listed years in kitchens overseas. No curiosity at all. The dinner rush hit hard. Plates stacked faster than Luis could clear them. Pans came back scorched. Cooks shouted orders in shorthand Luis understood perfectly, even when they assumed he didn't. He moved fast, methodical, efficient, finding a rhythm that made the chaos manageable. He noticed everything, which dishes came back untouched, which sauces were scraped clean, which specials customers barely touched. Out front, the laughter rose again. One of the line cooks leaned into the dish area, grinning. "Hey, dishwasher," he said loudly. "You ever eat real food, or you just live on scraps back here?" Another cook laughed. "Careful, man, he might be a secret chef." More laughter. Luis kept scrubbing. He had cooked before, he had studied food. He had learned flavors the way some people learned music, by ear, by memory, by feel. But Barton's Grill didn't want chefs from places like where Luis came from. They wanted hands, not ideas. As the night wore on, Luis caught a glimpse of the dining room through the swinging doors. Families, businessmen, couples on dates, plates of burgers and steaks and overpriced sides moving out in steady waves. The food was fine, safe, forgettable. The signature sauce, the one Rick bragged about constantly, came back half-finished on more plates than not. Luis noticed. At the end of the shift, close to midnight, the kitchen slowed. The cooks leaned against counters, scrolling through phones, joking loudly. Rick walked through, clapping his hands. "Good night," he said. "We survived. Dishwasher, make sure everything's spotless. Don't mess it up." Luis nodded. When everyone else left, the kitchen fell quiet. The hum of refrigerators replaced the noise. Luis finished cleaning, then stood for a moment, alone, looking at the ingredients laid out for tomorrow. Spices, oils, herbs, sauces. On impulse, he took a small spoon. He mixed, just a little, adjusted the balance, smelled it, tasted it. The difference was immediate, richer, deeper, alive. Luis cleaned the spoon carefully, erased all evidence, and turned off the lights. No one knew what he had done, no one knew what he could do. But as he stepped out into the cool night air, hands aching, clothes soaked, Luis felt something he hadn't felt since arriving in this country. A quiet certainty. They were laughing at a dishwasher. They had no idea they were standing at the edge of something that could change everything, not just for the restaurant, but for him. And someday soon, they would stop laughing. Not because Luis demanded respect, but because his food would make it impossible to ignore him. The next few nights at Barton's Grill followed the same pattern. Luis arrived early, tied his apron, and disappeared into the heat and steam of the dish pit. The work was relentless. Plates slammed down without warning. Silverware came back tangled and sharp. Hot water splashed onto his wrists, leaving red marks he didn't bother to check anymore. No one thanked him. No one learned his name. To the staff, he was simply the dishwasher, a position, not a person. But Luis watched. He watched which servers came back frustrated because customers complained. He watched which dishes cooks remade most often. He watched the trash can fill with barely touched fries, soggy buns, overcooked meat. The restaurant stayed busy, but something was off. People came once, rarely twice. Rick blamed marketing. The cooks blamed customers. No one blamed the food. One evening, during a lull before the rush, Luis overheard two line cooks arguing. "They want us to push the signature plate again," one said. "Why?" the other scoffed. "People don't even finish it." Rick says it's the brand. "Well, the brand tastes like nothing." They both laughed. Luis didn't. That night, as he scrubbed sauce off plates, he noticed something familiar in the smell drifting from the kitchen. The seasoning profile was flat. Not bad, just empty, built to offend no one and excite no one. It reminded him of the first restaurant he worked in back home before he learned what boldness could do to food. At closing, Rick stormed through the kitchen again, annoyed. "Another table complained," he snapped, said the food was bland. One of the cooks shrugged. "Recipe's your recipe." Rick glared, then noticed Luis nearby. "You got a problem with the food too?" Luis hesitated. Every instinct told him to stay quiet. This job paid just enough. Speaking up never went well for people like him. He had seen it before. Ideas stolen, accents mocked, confidence punished. "No, sir," he said softly. Rick snorted. "Good. Stick to washing." The cooks laughed again. Later that night, alone once more, Luis stared at the prep station. He could still taste the adjustment he had made to the sauce days earlier, the warmth it had brought, the way it lingered. He knew exactly what this food needed. Not a complete overhaul, just honesty. He glanced at the clock. Plenty of time before morning prep. Carefully, he recreated the sauce in a small bowl. He used what the kitchen already had, nothing exotic, nothing expensive, just balance. Acid where there was none, heat where it was missing, depth where everything else fell flat. He tasted it. Perfect. Luis cleaned up again, more carefully than before, making sure nothing looked disturbed. He poured the sauce down the drain, knowing that tonight wasn't the night. Not yet, but the idea had taken root. The next day, during the dinner rush, chaos erupted in the kitchen. A large party complained. Again. Plates came back nearly full. Rick's face turned red. "Fix it," he snapped at the cooks. "I don't care how." One cook slammed a pan down. "What do you want us to do? We follow your recipe." Rick threw his hands up and stormed toward the office. For the first time, no one was laughing. Luis stood at the sink, heart pounding. This was the moment he had been waiting for, or the one he had been afraid of. He wiped his hands slowly, took a breath, and spoke just loud enough to be heard. "I can help," he said. The kitchen went silent. Every head turned. The dishwasher had spoken. For a few seconds, no one moved. Steam rose from the sinks. A burner clicked uselessly as a pan cooled. The line cook stared at Luis as if the dishwasher had just suggested flying the restaurant to the moon. Rick stepped back into the kitchen, already irritated. "You can help with what?" he asked sharply. Luis swallowed. His heart was beating hard, but his voice came out steady. "The sauce," he said. "It's missing balance. I can fix it." A cook snorted. Another laughed openly. "Man, just wash the plates." Rick's mouth twisted into something between amusement and annoyance. "You saying you know better than my chefs?" Luis met his eyes. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't apologize. "I'm saying the customers are right," he said, "and I know how to make them stop complaining." The laughter faded. Rick looked around, searching for support, but the cooks avoided his gaze. They were tired, frustrated, running out of excuses. Another full table had just sent food back, and the servers were watching from the doorway like witnesses to a slow collapse. Rick exhaled hard. "You've got 2 minutes," he said. 2. You mess this up, you're done." Luis nodded once. He moved quickly, not nervously. His hands knew what to do. He grabbed the familiar ingredients, adjusted quantities by instinct rather than measurement. A pinch here, a splash there. He stirred, tasted, adjusted again. The kitchen watched in silence, curiosity replacing mockery. He handed the spoon to the nearest cook. "Try it," Luis said. The cook hesitated, then tasted it. His eyes widened just slightly. He tasted again. "That's different." "Better?" someone asked. The cook nodded slowly. "Yeah, way better." Rick frowned. "Let me see." He took the spoon, tasted it, and froze. The change wasn't subtle. The sauce had depth now. Heat. A finish that made you want another bite instead of pushing the plate away. Rick said nothing for a long moment. "Use it," he finally muttered. "On the next table." The cooks moved fast. The modified sauce went out with the refired dishes. Everyone waited. Minutes passed. Then the server returned, smiling. "They loved it," she said. Asked what changed. The kitchen erupted, not with laughter this time, but with disbelief. Rick stared at Luis. Really stared at him, as if seeing him for the first time. "Where did you learn to cook like that?" he asked. Luis wiped his hands on his apron. "From listening," he said, "and from cooking where food had to matter." Rick didn't respond right away. His pride was wrestling with reality, and reality was winning. "Come in early tomorrow," Rick finally said. "We'll talk." That night, as Luis walked home under flickering streetlights, his hands still smelled faintly of spices. His back ached, his feet hurt. But inside, something felt lighter. They hadn't laughed this time, they had listened. And in a restaurant built on noise and ego, that small shift meant everything. Because Luis knew this wasn't just about a sauce anymore. It was the first crack in a wall that had never expected a dishwasher to push back. And once it cracked, it wouldn't stop there. The next morning, Luis arrived at Barton's Grill earlier than he ever had before. The dining room was dark, chairs still flipped onto tables, the smell of last night's grease hanging faintly in the air. The kitchen lights were on, but quieter, no shouting, no clatter, just the low hum of refrigerators and the sound of prep knives hitting cutting boards. Rick was already there. He stood at the prep counter with a cup of coffee, sleeves rolled up, looking tired in a way Luis hadn't seen before. Not angry tired, worried tired. "You actually showed up," Rick said, not looking up. "I said I would," Luis replied. Rick nodded once. "Sit." Luis sat at the stainless steel table, hands folded, posture straight. This wasn't a victory lap. He knew better. One good idea didn't erase weeks of being invisible. People didn't give up power that easily. Rick finally turned toward him. "I ran the numbers this morning," he said. "That table last night, they stayed, ordered dessert, left a review before they even walked out." Luis said nothing. Rick exhaled. "I've owned this place 8 years. Same recipe the whole time. Thought consistency was the key." "Consistency matters," Luis said carefully. "But so does honesty." Rick studied him. "You didn't just guess, did you?" Luis shook his head. "I watched. I listened. I tasted what came back." Rick laughed softly, not mockingly this time. "You know how many consultants I've paid to tell me nothing useful." He pushed a notepad across the table. "Write it down, the recipe, exactly how you'd make it." Luis hesitated. This was the moment he'd been burned by before. Ideas taken, credit disappearing, promises dissolving once results were secured. "I will," Luis said. "If we're clear about something first." Rick raised an eyebrow. "Which is?" "I don't want to be the dishwasher who fixes problems for free," Luis said evenly. "If you use my recipe, I want to be part of the kitchen. Officially." The silence stretched. Rick leaned back, thinking. For the first time, there was no laughter in his eyes. Just calculation, and respect growing where dismissal used to live. "You got guts," Rick said finally. "No," Luis replied. "I've got limits." Rick nodded slowly. "Prep cook, starting tonight, higher pay, we see how it goes." Luis let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. "That works." That night, the new sauce went out on every plate. The difference was immediate. Plates came back clean. Servers stopped apologizing. Customers asked questions. Someone took a photo of their meal and tagged the restaurant online. Another table asked if the sauce was bottled yet. By closing, Rick stood in the dining room staring at a full reservation list for the weekend. "This is insane," he muttered. In the kitchen, the cooks treated Luis differently now, still cautious, still unsure, but the jokes were gone. Questions replaced them. "How'd you get that balance? What else would you change? Can you taste this?" Luis answered when asked. He didn't boast. He didn't rush. He cooked. Weeks passed. The restaurant's reputation shifted. Word spread. One location wasn't enough anymore. Rick talked about expansion, first as a joke, then as a plan. One night, as Luis wiped down his station, Rick approached him. "We're opening a second place," Rick said, "and I need that sauce to be ours." Luis looked at him. "It already is," he said. "If you do it right." Rick smiled. "I want you in on it. Recipe development, training, profit share." Luis nodded slowly. "Then we do it together." They shook hands. Years later, Barton's Grill wasn't just a restaurant. It was a name on storefronts across the state. The sauce became the brand, bold, recognizable, impossible to imitate without losing its soul. And every new kitchen hired dishwashers first, because Rick had learned something he'd never forget. They had laughed at a dishwasher, but it was his recipe that built the franchise and reminded everyone that greatness often starts in the places no one bothers to look.